not recommended for persons under the age of 12.
Staring down a thunderstorm above the North Sea.
Take a look at that.
No, I don't like it.
A modern turboprop is struck by more than 1,000,000 volts.
After the lightning strike, you're obviously looking to see, have we been damaged?
Damn it, the plane's not responding. Help me pull.
You can fly an aircraft without a compass. You can fly an aircraft without a radio.
Mayday. We've been struck by lightning and are having control difficulties.
But you can't fly an aircraft without functioning controls.
But investigators can't figure out how lightning could have caused the plane to behave the way it did.
Look at that. I mean, the elevators are trying to get the nose to pitch down instead of up.
We've not come across an aircraft where there would be this difference between the pilot input and what the aircraft was actually doing.
Oh, no!
We're dropping!
They were so distracted by that, they failed to see what was really going on.
It's 6:45 p.m. Logan Air Flight 6780 cruises over the North Sea near Scotland.
Let's get lower. Request flight level 110, please.
Approach Logan Air 6780, requesting descent to 110.
6780, descend to 110.
The plane is more than halfway through a 65-minute flight. Most of the passengers live on the Shetland Islands.
All done? Yes, thank you. I'll take that.
Many are returning home from holiday shopping in Aberdeen.
Air travel is massively important to residents in Shetland. It's important for work meetings, it's important for sporting events, for holidays. It's the fastest way to travel off island, so it's quick and convenient.
The captain is experienced. He has more than 5,000 flying hours and is the pilot flying tonight.
Passing flight level 150.
The first officer is monitoring the instruments and handling all communications.
Approach Logan 6780, descending through flight level 150 for the ILS runway 27.
She has more than 1,000 flying hours.
Crew had a good total experience. Of course, they didn't have a lot of experience flying the Saab 2000, but still, it was a normally experienced crew.
The Saab 2000 is a twin-engine, high-speed turboprop. It's a plane that aviation analyst Hans-Peter Graf knows extremely well.
The Saab 2000 is the most advanced turboprop still existing and flying. It has a jet-like performance, paired with low fuel consumption. And it had real good performance to fly in and out of mountainous terrain.
They're traveling north from Aberdeen, Scotland, to Sombra on the Shetland Islands, a remote archipelago prone to winter squalls and even hurricanes.
Logan Air 6780.
For your information, looks like the ATIS antenna at Sombra has been struck by lightning, so the system's not functioning.
I'll update conditions when I get them.
Okay, thanks for the update.
There's been a lot of that so far this winter.
The ATIS, or Automatic Terminal Information Service, provides pilots with continuous broadcast of essential information.
It broadcasts weather and airport information every 30 minutes, on which the pilots will base their approaches and landings.
Why don't you tune ATIS in anyway?
Sombra Information Tango. Winds 290 at 34. Gusting 47. Visibility.
Guess it didn't get fried after all.
Gusting 47. It's gonna get a bit rough on the way down.
The winds at Sombra Airport are blowing up to 47 knots, 54 miles an hour. The crew will be facing strong gale force winds while landing.
travel by air a lot when it does get windy. We were expecting a little bit of turbulence on the way. We knew flight of that size, it's a small flight, you do feel turbulence more than what you would on a bigger plane, but it was nothing unusual.
The captain wants to be ready for any unpredictable weather thrown at them.
Let's brief in case of a lightning strike.
Copy that.
Okay, right. Instrument lights are full in case we get blinded. Torches are here and here on your side, and the emergency elevator trim switch is overhead. Any questions?
No questions.
The statistics suggest that a particular aircraft will probably get a lightning strike about 1.5 times a year. You don't know when it's coming, of course, and the thing you're aware of is that these lightning strikes can affect the electronics and the avionics in the aircraft.
Logan 6780.
Fly heading 355.
Latest weather from Sunborough. Visibility 3300 now.
Moderate rain and snow. Runway is wet.
355 to 6780. Got the weather too, thanks.
I'm gonna slow it down to 205 before we get into the chop.
Roger that.
The crew prepares the plane for the turbulence ahead.
All right, let's get them buckled in back there.
"16 miles from Sunborough Airport, Flight 6780 turns onto its final approach to the runway.
Take a look at that.
I don't like it.
There's some bad weather developing off the end of the runway.
Approach Logan 6780. There's a big storm cell on radar just off the runway. We might need to discontinue.
6780. Roger. Let me know.
All crews going into an airfield in these sorts of conditions will be wary of the thunderstorms activity around them.
The pilots consider their options.
How much fuel do we have left?
2,500 kilos. You want to head back to Aberdeen?
Let's circle. Make another attempt.
They abandoned the approach when they saw a lot of precipitation on their weather radar just ahead of them. Updrafts, downdrafts, wind shears, which are not predictable. So you better go around and wait or divert to another airport.
Logan 6780. We're going to circle around, turning 180 for now.
6780.
Understood. Maintain 2000.
He obviously made the decision that at that time he would just turn away from the airfield and probably allow that weather to pass through and then have another approach.
As the pilots circle for another landing attempt.
It sounded like a gunshot. It was just a very short, sharp noise and a flash. I thought at that point that it was something that had happened to the engines.
If you experience a lightning strike, especially at night, it's a very bright light. You can smell a burn smell, ozone smell, and that sure is frightening or fearsome to every crew.
Circuit breakers look fine.
After the lightning strike, you're obviously looking to see, have we been damaged? Are the instruments still working correctly?
And I have control.
But something's wrong.
The controls feel really heavy. Damn it, the plane's not responding.
There must be a degree of panic will set in where the controls are just not responding.
The plane isn't responding.
Mayday, Mayday. This is Logan Air 6780. We've been struck by lightning and are having control difficulties. Please clear the airspace.
I knew that there was definitely something not right. I was terrified.
Abandoned, but not forgotten. Neglected, but still reminding of its history.
Looks like something from Mad Max meets Waterworld. What's it doing there?
Decaying ruins, deserted towns hiding their secrets, remnants of an ancient world, haunted by the ghosts of the past. Let's discover their secrets. Abandoned Engineering. Friday at 10 p.m. on National Geographic.
Dobro jutro. Raspored za danas. U 10:30 imate sastanak sa odborom. U 11 časova sastanak sa klijentima i molim vas nemojte zaboraviti u 15:11 za čestite svoj majci rođendan. Koliko godina puni? Fantastično. Nego javite vašu službu da pokupite desnu školu. Ovo su prednici za danas. Koji kafu pijete? Odličan izbor.
Znam kako će lakše da pregojem ovaj dan.
Jakobs 3 u 1. Savršena kombinacija kafe, mleka i šećera. Jakobs te vodi u bioskop. Kupi 12 Jakobs 3 u 1 ili 2 u 1 kesica kafe i zameni ih za kartu u Cineplex bioskopima. Jakobs.
We dig deeper. Push the boundaries further. In a search for discoveries that could rewrite the history books.
It's kind of unusual.
With finds so big,
We should have to go deeper.
we can't show you yet.
Whoa, what an adventure.
A brand new season, Lost Treasures of Egypt, on National Geographic.
Not recommended for persons under the age of 12.
Loganair Flight 6780 is in distress 2,000 feet above the North Sea.
Mayday, mayday, this is Loganair 6780. Please clear the airspace.
6780, copy. If you can, souls on board and fuel remaining.
33 souls on board. 2,500 kilograms of fuel.
Copy. All options are available. Do you want to land or divert?
Without knowing what's wrong with the plane.
It's really fighting me.
It's too risky to attempt landing in a storm at Sumbra Airport.
We should divert back to Aberdeen. Better conditions.
Agreed.
Aberdeen Airport is 190 miles away.
Let's try climbing to 4,000.
6780, we're going to divert back to Aberdeen.
Something's wrong. I can't get the plane to climb. How's your side?
It's really heavy. Trim's not doing anything either.
If you grab on the yoke and the airplane is not responding, they realize, hey, there's something wrong. We need to do something.
Finally, the crew catches a small break.
Altitude is increasing.
Keep on it.
The plane is climbing, but not as quickly as it should be.
The elevators might be damaged.
In 2 minutes, the plane has barely climbed 2,000 feet. The first officer worries the lightning strike may have disabled their instruments.
Aberdeen 6780, what's our altitude?
I show you approaching 4,000 feet.
But the controller is getting the exact same readings as the crew.
We're really not going anywhere fast.
Pull! I'm almost all the way back.
Let's face it, you can fly an aircraft without a compass, you can fly an aircraft without a radio, but you can't fly an aircraft without functioning controls.
And then the unthinkable happens.
Oh, no! Come on!
We're dropping!
Flight 6780 plunges uncontrollably towards the North Sea.
The flight went into that nosedive, so we knew immediately that something wasn't right with the plane.
6780, 3800 now, 600, 3400.
The pilots wrestle with their controls as the plane speeds towards the water at 350 miles an hour.
You're descending.
2,000 feet, 1,800 feet.
The dive was so fast, you just felt like your heart was in your mouth. I had no idea how close we were to the sea. You couldn't see anything. It was just pitch black. It was terrifying. It was really scary.
1,500 feet. You're descending.
Nothing's working.
Come on. Pull up.
The airplane is less than 10 seconds from impact.
Must be incredibly frightening because the pilots would be aware of their rate of descent, they would be aware of their altitude, and they would be aware of how much time left they had to effect a recovery.
1100.
Speed! Speed!
In a last-ditch effort to save the plane, the captain increases engine power.
We're climbing.
So increasing the power may increase the amount of airflow over the wings and give you a little bit more lift to allow the aircraft to pull out of its descent.
We were travelling at such a speed that when the plane started pulling up again, it was a kind of a sensation of being on a roller coaster. It was definitely a relief to start climbing after that nose pitch.
The pilots have avoided near catastrophe. But now they need to get their plane back to Aberdeen safely.
In the moments after that, we had a period of just terrible turbulence, the worst turbulence I've ever experienced. The man behind me started vomiting. Everybody was the flight was quite quiet, though. It was kind of eerily quiet.
Requesting flight level 240.
6780.
Roger. Climb and maintain 240.
The controls are working better now.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain.
It was at that point the pilot came on and told us we'd been struck by lightning and we were heading back to Aberdeen.
We had some flight control issues. Everything is under control now. We'll be landing in Aberdeen in 15 minutes. And please expect to see some emergency services on the ground when we land. Not to panic. It's just a standard precaution. Thank you.
When you go through a moment like that, you panic until you're on the ground.
Let's fly a straight and approach. I'll get this plane on the ground as soon as possible.
The pilots of Logan Air Flight 6780 are on final approach to Aberdeen Airport.
Aberdeen 6780, established on the localizer, runway 16.
Not knowing which instruments they can trust, the pilots carefully configure the plane for landing.
Flaps 35.
Flaps 35.
Control feels normal.
Having avoided disaster twice already, their sole focus is to get the plane safely on the ground.
130. Speed looks good. Decision height.
Runway in sight. Continue.
The pilot came on and told us we'd be expecting a normal landing, but the emergency services would be on the runway. We weren't to be alarmed if we saw the lights.
All right. 50 knots, coming out of reverse.
Check.
The landing was smooth in Aberdeen. I was just glad that we were on the ground.
Happy to be on solid ground.
Me too.
I burst out into tears. It was relief more probably than anything. A little bit of shock probably too.
It's up to investigators at the Air Accidents Investigation Branch, or AAIB, to figure out what went wrong. David Miller is the deputy chief overseeing the investigation.
I decided that this would be a full investigation because of the closeness this aircraft came to disaster. We then dispatched a small team of investigators to the operator's base to interview the crew and to examine the aircraft.
Very quickly, the flight data and cockpit voice recorders are recovered from the Saab 2000.
Great work. Let's hope they can provide some answers.
Let's hope.
The normal process for an investigation is the investigators take the recorders, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder, bring them back to the laboratories and recover the data.
Looks to be in pretty good shape.
Unusually so.
Investigators need to confirm the crew's report of a lightning strike, as well as the flight attendant's account of seeing an orb of light pass through the cabin. Ball lightning is a rare and little understood phenomenon known to precede lightning strikes inside airplanes.
Right. Well, there's no damage on the wingtip.
A lightning can strike more or less anywhere on an aircraft, but it tends to strike on the leading edge of the wings, on the radome at the front of the aircraft.
Soot marks on the radome.
Investigators see signs of a lightning strike on the nose of the aircraft.
Looks like some surface damage as well. Yeah? Yeah.
The point of strike will often leave scarring, localized burning, sometimes a small hole.
Right, let's see where it exited the aircraft then. Elevators look fine. Hang on. Have a look at that exhaust cone.
Oh, yeah.
That's where the lightning exited. Look at it, parts of it are completely melted.
There was a little bit of burning damage both to the front of the aircraft and the exit point of the lightning strike, which was at the very tail of the aircraft where the auxiliary power unit exhaust was placed.
Oh, crap!
The team now knows how the lightning struck the plane.
The controls feel really heavy.
So one of the first things to go and have a look at what was the effect of the lightning strike. Were the systems damaged? Were there malfunctions?
Okay, you ready?
The AAIB tests the plane's flight controls to see if they're working.
Okay, check the rudder.
Looks good. How about the elevators? Yeah, elevators are working too. Everything checks out.
Investigators are perplexed. If the plane was functioning properly, why did it become so difficult to control after the lightning strike?
There were no abnormalities, no system defects that we could find either structurally or within the avionics. Beyond that, it looked like a completely normal, serviceable aircraft.
AAIB investigators interview the pilots of Flight 6780.
When we're fortunate enough, as in these circumstances, to have a surviving flight crew, then their recollections are really important for us to understand exactly how the event progressed from their perspective.
So what happened after the lightning struck the plane?
After the lightning struck, the autopilot disconnected. I have control.
The crew of the aircraft became aware fairly shortly after the lightning strike that the aircraft wasn't responding as they expected to their flight control inputs.
And then what happened?
We had control issues. Plane wouldn't climb.
We tried everything and the plane wasn't responding.
The pilot flying was finding that he was having to put an increasingly strong backward effort on the control column to raise the nose of the aircraft.
I can't get the plane to climb. How's your side?
It's really heavy. Trim's not doing anything either.
The aircraft wasn't responding the way that he expected.
And then?
And then we entered a steep nosedive.
And the control issues continued.
Nothing's working.
Come on. Pull.
Speed! Speed!
It wasn't until after we'd increased power that we were able to get the aircraft under control.
Oh, really?
Why did the crew believe that they had control restrictions and control problems when in fact testing of the aircraft showed that there were no faults.
I've never thought I would be a drug smuggler.
I mean, what can go wrong?
The story doesn't end there. I was gonna go to the DEA, and I was gonna crush him. My childhood was stolen from me. I just didn't care.
Here we go.
There was roaches, there was rats, but in reality, it's even worse.
Now my freedom is over.
The new season of Banged Up Abroad on National Geographic.
Za neke se stvari lako zagrejati. Kao za domaći ukus Podravka supe, koji u naše živote uvek donosi osjećaj topline. Baš zato smo zagrejani za supu već 65 godina. Podravka.
Jakobs 3 u 1. Savršena kombinacija kafe, mleka i šećera. Jakobs te vodi u bioskop. Kupi 12 Jakobs 3 u 1 ili 2 u 1 kesica kafe i zameni ih za kartu u Cineplex bioskopima. Jakobs.
Abandoned, but not forgotten. Neglected, but still reminding of its history.
Looks like something from Mad Max meets Waterworld. What's it doing there?
Decaying ruins, deserted towns hiding their secrets, remnants of an ancient world, haunted by the ghosts of the past. Let's discover their secrets. Abandoned Engineering. Friday at 10 p.m. on National Geographic. Not recommended for persons under the age of 12.
Let's have a listen, shall we?
Puzzled by the crew's account of the incident on board Flight 6780, investigators turn to the cockpit voice recorder for answers.
It will answer many questions as to why things were happening the way they were and how the crew were working together and interacting together.
Aberdeen ground 6780, taxiing on Whiskey for parking stand 7.
But something's not right.
Aberdeen? Now, this is from when they landed back at Aberdeen.
Right, can you stop it and go back to the top and play the game, please?
Aberdeen ground 6780, taxiing on Whiskey for parking stand 7.
That's all there is. Well, that's not going to help us very much now, is it?
The CVR has recorded over the critical moments of the flight. It's a major setback for the investigation.
We discovered that the cockpit voice recorder, which only lasts for 30 minutes, has been overwritten by subsequent events. So there was no record of the crew conversation and how they interacted with each other. And so you have to look elsewhere for the information.
Right, this is what we know so far. The lightning struck, the autopilot disconnected, they had control problems. Then, the plane did a nosedive.
Well, let's review the data.
Will the data recorder provide the answers they need to solve this case?
Flight data recorders often add a level of detail that simply can't be gained from the witnesses themselves. And crucially, quite often the information that's gathered from a recording device offers a slightly different perspective to what we might get from personal recollections.
Stop. This is where the lightning struck at 2,000 feet.
Right, and then for the next 2.5 minutes, there's a slow, uneven climb to 4,000 feet. And then they are in a very steep nosedive for 20 seconds towards the North Sea.
That's 9,500 feet per minute.
Investigators are struck by how close the flight came to total disaster.
It was 7 seconds from plunging into the sea before they finally managed to pull out at 1,100 feet.
The aircraft had a very high rate of descent in the moments before it reached that height, and so we were really very close to a very serious accident.
What were the pilots doing to recover from the dive?
Look at the control column data.
Right after the lightning struck, the crew pulled back on the control column to pitch the nose up.
I have control. Controls feel really heavy.
Look at the line. I mean, they're having a very difficult time getting that plane to climb.
We know from the data that the aircraft climbed to around about 4,000 feet. The pilot was finding that he was having to put an increasingly strong backward effort on the control column to raise the nose of the aircraft. And the aircraft wasn't responding the way that he expected.
The FDR data confirms the pilots were tackling a control problem. But why?
The captain said they were also applying pitch trim.
Pitch trim moves the tail elevators up and down to maintain the pitch of the aircraft.
Could we take a look at the pitch trim data, please?
Right.
Investigators make a puzzling discovery.
Look at that. And the elevators are trying to get the nose to pitch down instead of up.
After the lightning strike, some unknown force was fighting the pilot's inputs to both the control column and the pitch trim.
It's very difficult to imagine what, let's say, an 80-pound force feels like. Normal control pressures are much, much lower than that, in the order of sort of 10 to 20 pounds. So an 80-pound pull is really extraordinary and very difficult to maintain.
Something's wrong. I can't get the plane to climb. How's your side?
It's really heavy. Trim's not doing anything either.
We found that although the pilots were applying a significant nose-up pitch control input by pulling the stick back towards them, the aircraft was actually trimmed nose down. Whatever was trimming the pitch control system was effectively overcoming the effort of the pilots.
The crew said the lightning struck, the autopilot disconnected, and then they had control problems.
Right.
Could we take a look at the autopilot data, please?
Finally, the team zeroes in on the answer.
The autopilot was on almost the entire time.
The pilots themselves were very clear in their recollection that it had disengaged. All of the evidence we had indicated that the autopilot had, in fact, remained engaged.
It's no wonder the pilot had control problems. The autopilot was set to keep the plane at 2,000 feet.
Right, and whenever the pilots tried to get the plane to climb, the autopilot would engage and bring the plane back down.
Back to its assigned altitude.
Investigators discover that after the lightning strike, the pilots were in a tug of war with the plane.
I can't get the plane to climb. How's your side?
It's really heavy.
So we then had to look at why did the crew misunderstand the status of the aircraft.
The AAIB contacts the captain of Flight 6780 to better understand why he thought the autopilot disconnected, when in fact it hadn't.
The Saab 340? Okay, thanks. He said he assumed the lightning would disable the autopilot.
The team learns the pilot trained for lightning strikes on another airplane, the Saab 340.
To change from Saab 340 to the Saab 2000, you can say it's like changing from a motorbike to a bus. All systems are different. Performance is different. You're flying a totally different airplane.
During the training on the Saab 340, the commander had experienced a simulated lightning strike to that aircraft, which caused both generators to fail. And in doing so, would cause the autopilot to disconnect.
And I have control.
So when the lightning strike happened for real, his first thoughts were, the autopilot has failed.
The controls feel really heavy.
I must control the aircraft myself. And in fact, the lightning strike had had minimal effect on the aircraft.
Would you pull up the control data column again, please?
If the lightning didn't disconnect the autopilot, investigators wonder why it remained engaged for more than 2 minutes as the pilots struggled with the controls.
Wouldn't the force applied to the control column and the pitch trim have overridden the autopilot?
Now, in most aircraft, if the pilot intervenes on the controls and tries to apply a force against the autopilot is designed to disengage.
One way of thinking about this is to imagine you're driving down the highway in a car on cruise control, and you're getting close to a car in front of you, so you press the brake. And what you expect to happen is for the car to slow down. You don't expect the cruise control to oppose the brake and add more power to maintain 65 miles an hour. But that's essentially what was happening in this case.
The autopilot was attempting to keep the plane at 2,000 feet, despite all attempts by the crew to climb.
It says here, applying an override force to the column will not cause the autopilot to disengage.
In the sub 2000, the autopilot would not disconnect when you exert force on the control columns.
And more. Pressing the main pitch trim switches also has no effect to cause the autopilot to disengage.
The team is surprised to discover there is no force override for the autopilot in the Saab 2000.
Something's wrong. I can't get the plane to climb.
One thing the pilot would have done is, as he pulled back, feeling the force on the control column, he would have used the switches on the control column to apply trim in the appropriate way.
How's your side?
It's really heavy. Trim's not doing anything either.
But when the autopilot's engaged, in this model of aircraft, the trim switches are inhibited. So no matter how much they've selected those trim switches, they were having absolutely no effect.
Investigators soon discover that the Saab 2000 is unique.
Look at that. Yeah.
It's one of the few planes in existence that doesn't have an autopilot override.
Every plane has an autopilot override function, except for the Saab 2000.
It just had a different design to all the other aircraft we were aware of. And really to discover that the autopilot had greater authority than the human pilots was a bit of a revelation for us.
It still doesn't explain why the crew didn't know the autopilot was on almost the entire time.
Wouldn't there be some sort of indicator in the cockpit?
Yeah, I'll show you. Look over here.
When the autopilot is connected, that will be a green AP.
Well, what does the control panel look like when the autopilot goes off?
Like this.
When that autopilot is not connected, it will be a white AP, but the letters AP remain.
That's it?
That's it, just goes from green to white.
One could argue whether that visual clue is enough to warn the crew the status of the autopilot.
And I have control.
It's not as if the AP disappears when it's not engaged and appears when it is engaged.
Oh, no! Come on!
We're dropping!
But all we have here is a colour change between green and white, and that sometimes is very difficult to perceive when you're in a high-stress situation.
Investigators believe that the autopilot visual indication might have been too small for the pilots to see as they struggled to control their plane.
Surely there would have been oral warnings. Yes, right here. It says the plane's computer would have sounded a caution chime.
Even if the pilots missed the visual indications for the autopilot, caution chimes would have alerted them when they adjusted the pitch trim.
The captain never said anything about hearing any chimes.
Right, so what's going on then?
3780, 3800 now.
If they are trimming against the autopilot for more than 10 seconds, a chime will announce to say that there is a pitch mistrim situation.
We see from the data that it's highly likely that the alerts would have occurred, but the crew don't recall having heard them.
Nothing's working!
Come on!
So why did the pilots of Flight 6780 ignore all warnings telling them that the autopilot was in control?
I never thought I would be a drug smuggler.
I mean, what can go wrong?
The story doesn't end there. I was gonna go to the DEA, and I was gonna crush him. My childhood was stolen from me. I just didn't care.
Here we go.
There was roaches, there was rats, but in reality, it's even worse.
Now my freedom is over.
The new season of Banged Up Abroad on National Geographic.
Jakobs 3 u 1. Savršena kombinacija kafe, mleka i šećera. Jakobs te vodi u bioskop. Kupi 12 Jakobs 3 u 1 ili 2 u 1 kesica kafe i zameni ih za kartu u Cineplex bioskopima. Jakobs.
The ocean shrouds its secrets in darkness. Now, its sunken stories are being brought to light.
What was the key to life and death?
This has really turned into a mystery.
It was known as the eighth wonder of the world.
Could the emperor be in the cargo hold?
It was like a detective story.
Brand new Drain the Oceans on National Geographic.
Not recommended for persons under the age of 12.
AAIB investigators have learned that after a lightning strike, the crew of Logan Air Flight 6780 didn't recall hearing audible warnings that the autopilot was engaged and set to maintain 2,000 feet.
Lightning struck the plane, and for 2.5 minutes, the crew struggled with the controls to get the plane to climb.
Right, they were so distracted by that, they failed to see what was really going on.
Could the stress have affected their perception of the situation?
You have to bear in mind, of course, this was at night, in turbulent, poor weather, heavy rain. And the lightning strike would have been really quite bright, and the noise would have been alarming. So it's sort of understandable that their performance was degraded because of the stress situation.
But I have control.
A couple of things happen when we get stressed. We tend to focus on fewer and fewer things, and we tend to not notice the other things. And that can be either visual cues or auditory cues. So we get what's called cognitive tunneling, and one aspect of that is inattentional deafness. So an alert might occur, but we might not hear it.
It's very difficult for a crew to break the vicious circle of cognitive tunneling, where they're concentrating on one event and not looking at the bigger picture.
The controls feel really heavy.
But if the pilots were suffering from cognitive tunneling, how were they able to regain control of the plane?
Okay, look at this.
The AAIB makes one last horrifying discovery.
The only reason the autopilot ever disengaged was because of a random glitch in the plane's computer system.
The reason for the disconnection was that there was a momentary loss of data to the air data computer. And we know that's one of the conditions that would cause the autopilot to disconnect, and that's what caused it to disconnect in this case.
Had the autopilot disconnected more than 7 seconds later, the airplane would have gone into the ocean in a dive at over 300 knots. This wasn't a fatal accident by pure luck.
Investigators believe they finally understand what caused the terrifying incident on board Logan Air Flight 6780. While circling away from a bad storm at Sunborough Airport.
Roger that. We'll wait until the storm's over.
The crew is startled and disoriented by a lightning strike. In a moment of high stress, the captain believes the autopilot has disengaged.
I have control.
When it hasn't.
The autopilot remained engaged and they didn't realize that was the case. So effectively from that point until it disengaged, they were fighting the autopilot. They wanted to climb, it wanted to descend, and because of the way the flight controls were configured, the autopilot was going to win.
Engaged in a tug of war with the aircraft, cognitive tunneling takes over.
Something's wrong. I can't get the plane to climb. How's your side?
The highly stressed pilots don't register the audible warnings telling them that the autopilot is still engaged.
It's really heavy. Trim's not doing anything either.
The final blow is a one-of-a-kind autopilot system without a force override.
I have every sympathy for crews being startled when something unusual happens, whether there's an explosive engine failure or a lightning strike in this case. But the training must kick in, and the crew must revert to, in effect, as I say, sit on your hands for a few moments, make an assessment of what's happened, what's gone wrong, what's working, what's not working, and then deal with the situation from there.
Oh, no! Come on!
We're dropping!
If it wasn't for a split-second fluke error in the computer system and the relentless efforts of the crew,
Speed! Speed!
Flight 6780 would have slammed into the North Sea at 380 miles per hour.
I would say I was a nervous flyer for a couple of years. So I've just kind of gone through the motions of sort of building myself up to knowing that it's going to be fine.
The final report recommends several safety changes to the autopilot system.
We then made recommendations looking at how aircraft could be certified in future to make sure that no future design could be certified where neither operation of the control column nor operation of the pitch control switches would result in disconnection of the autopilot.
For investigators, the lessons of Logan Air 6780 go beyond this one near tragedy.
We can only go so far in educating human operators in how a system works. Ultimately, we have to recognize that they will behave instinctively, particularly when under stress. That's the real challenge for the future of automated systems.
Not recommended for persons under the age of 12.
On an early morning takeoff in Kentucky,
100 knots, checked.
Two experienced pilots struggle to get their regional jet off the ground.
V1, rotate. Whoa.
And crash into a nearby field.
This was a catastrophic accident.
Investigators try to piece together what went wrong
Get those to Washington.
and end up with more questions than answers.
Why the heck would they stop there?
Only by retracing the taxi route
All the cues are right there, in plain sight.
and listening to the cockpit discussions.
That is weird with no lights.
Yeah. Do investigators discover the grim truth?
They finally realize something's wrong, but it's already too late.
It's almost 6 in the morning in Lexington, Kentucky. The pilots of Comair Flight 5191 prepare for their pre-flight briefing. In command is Captain Jeff Clay, an experienced pilot with more than 4,700 flying hours.
Man, I always feel like I could eat a little more when I get a seatbelt like this.
First Officer James Polhinky is also a seasoned pilot with more than 6,500 hours.
You up for flying this leg? Yeah, I'll take us to Atlanta.
Both the captain and the first officer were very highly regarded.
Right seat flex, take off.
They had an outstanding professional reputation. and individuals that had flown with them had nothing but high marks and very, very favorable comments as far as their qualities.
The crew is flying a Bombardier CRJ-100, a small twin-engine jet designed for short commuter flights. Sean Pruchnicki flew that aircraft for Comair for 10 years.
The CRJ is an aircraft that's built for short-haul flights. For example, the Lexington to Atlanta, less than an hour type flight is really what these airplanes are designed to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to take this time to welcome you on board Comair Flight 5191, direct to Atlanta. We'll try to keep it as quiet as possible. Hopefully you can catch a nap on the way there. It's our pleasure having you on board today.
There are 47 passengers and 1 flight attendant on today's flight. The pilots begin their briefing.
Right flex takeoff procedures off of, he said what runway? 24?
It's 22.
Something that we do prior to takeoff is we do a flight briefing between the 2 crew members. And the primary reason we do this is to make sure that everyone has the same amount of information and knowledge to safely depart the airport.
Oh, on 22 the ILS is out. Even the other night, the runway identifier lights were out all over the place.
All right.
22's your short taxi. Any questions?
No questions before starting your leisure.
In the cabin, passengers prepare for takeoff.
Seatbelt, please.
Today, they are bound for Atlanta, Georgia. Just a 67-minute flight straight south from Lexington's Bluegrass Airport.
Comair 191 is ready to taxi.
Comair 191, taxi to runway 22. Altimeter 3000. Winds are 200 at 8.
3000 and taxi 22, Comair 191.
Lexington's air traffic controller clears Flight 5191 to the runway and then turns his attention to another plane.
Eagle Flight runway 22, cleared for takeoff.
With few planes at this small airport in near-perfect weather, this flight is far from challenging for these seasoned pilots.
During the taxi out, the captain is responsible primarily for navigating the aircraft on the airport surface. The first officer is running numerous checklists and verifying that the aircraft is safe for departure.
Folks, we're going to be underway momentarily, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. We're all ready in the cabin, sir. Thank you. Cabin reports received. Before takeoff checks complete. Ready.
All set.
At your leisure, Comair 121.
Ready to go.
Comair 191.
Lexington Tower. Fly runway heading, clear for takeoff.
Runway heading cleared for takeoff, 191.
Anti-ice off, lights set, takeoff config's okay, lineup checks completed.
All yours, Jim.
Captain Clay hands control of the aircraft to First Officer Paul Hinkey for takeoff.
My brakes, my controls. Set thrust, please.
Thrust set.
That is weird with no lights.
Yeah. Under knots.
Checks.
Something's not right.
V1, rotate.
As 5191 prepares to lift off. Whoa!
Damn it!
Comair Flight 5191 hurtles into a field less than half a mile from the runway.
This is Lexington. Alert 3. West side of the runway to the Comair regional jet taking off.
We knew something was wrong. We never get an Alert 3. We never get one.
Public Safety Officer Pete Moppin rushes to the scene.
It's hot. I mean, it's very hot. There were explosions. Can we save anybody? That was what I was thinking when I saw this ball of fire.
"49 people are dead after the tragic takeoff of Comair Flight 5191. First Officer Paul Hinkey is the only survivor.
The first responders' quick actions were the reason that First Officer Pohinky survived this accident. He was so traumatically injured that they recognized that time was of the essence and transported him to the hospital rather than waiting for an ambulance.
When he thanked me for saving his life, I told him that was my job, but I was glad that I was there to do what I did, and I told him that.
The question NTSB investigators now need to answer is why Comair Flight 5191 couldn't get off the ground.
We dig deeper, push the boundaries further, in a search for discoveries that could rewrite the history books.
It's kind of unusual.
With finds so big,
we should have to go deeper.
We can't show you yet.
Whoa, what an adventure.
A brand new season, Lost Treasures of Egypt, on National Geographic.
Jakobs 3 u 1. Savršena kombinacija kafe, mleka i šećera. Jakobs te vodi u bioskop. Kupi 12 Jakobs 3 u 1 ili 2 u 1 kesica kafe i zameni ih za kartu u Cineplex bioskopima. Jakobs.
Baš sam srećan, tako srećan što te imam. Želim ti reći hvala, a hvala znači merci.
Merci. Zadovoljstvo biranja iz jedinstvene kolekcije najfinijih čokolada.
Merci, moj mali način da ti kažem hvala. Merci, hvala što postojiš.
Vreme je za igru. Sakupi svoju Playtime kolekciju i saznaj više o fudbalu. Uz račun od minimum 1000 dinara i svaki posebno označeni proizvod dobiješ po jednu karticu sa likom fudbalera. Kartice sakupljaj u Playtime leksikonu. Samo u Ideji, Rodi i Mercatoru.
Let's start the pre-flight procedures.
This flight went from being routine into a life-threatening crisis.
Damn it!
In seconds.
Do you copy?
Who was guilty? Who was to blame?
No one notices what's happening. Till it's too late.
The new season of Air Crash Investigations Special Report on National Geographic. Not recommended for persons under the age of 12.
As soon as the fires are put out and the crash site is safe, NTSB investigators begin looking for clues to discover why Comair Flight 5191 crashed less than half a mile from Lexington's Bluegrass Airport.
Make sure every scrap is documented. We need a clear picture of the path this plane took before impact.
Lead investigator Joe Seedor is among the first to arrive at the crash site.
In this case, it was quite interesting because initially we didn't have much. An airplane had crashed. We didn't know if it was on the airport, off the airport. We actually started at the final resting place for the wreckage, and then we walked back towards the airport.
First impact point is there. And the plane hit those trees over there. Those impact marks aren't more than 20 feet up those trunks.
We were looking at the trajectory of the airplane. Clearly looked like it took off just about the end of the runway and immediately started contacting trees into the wreckage site.
The wreckage path tells investigators that the plane was struggling to get off the ground. Was it engine trouble or something else?
It looks like they took off from runway 26. But hang on. 26 wasn't in use last night.
Lexington Airport has two runways, runway 26 and runway 22.
According to the flight plan, they were supposed to take off from runway 22. So how the heck did they end up over here?
Investigators are surprised to discover that Flight 5191 took off from the wrong runway.
Well, at that point in time, because we knew that it was a wrong runway takeoff, the question is why, right? And it's one that doesn't make sense.
Did they misunderstand their instructions or deliberately change their plans to take off from a different runway?
There's got to be something on that CVR about why they were on runway 26. Get those to Washington.
The flight recorder and the cockpit voice recorder were retrieved and flown back here to Washington, D.C.
But being on the wrong runway doesn't explain why the plane barely made it off the ground.
Let's take a closer look at those engines.
When the engines are examined, what the investigator is looking for is damage. The more damage that there is and the type of damage tells us that if it was turning at high speed or turning at a lower speed.
Hey, they were spinning all right.
Evidence of deformed blades suggests the engines were running on impact.
All the indications were that both engines were operating at high power when the breakup sequence started. There was no problem with the engines.
Something else must have kept them from getting airborne. Maybe they were too heavy?
With engine failure ruled out, the team wonders if the plane was loaded with too much weight to take off.
There's a certain maximum weight that the aircraft can take off safely with. So what we do is we calculate the load that's on the aircraft at the time of the accident.
Oh, here it is. CRJ's max takeoff weight is 50,178 pounds.
And the load manifested the plane weighed 49,087 pounds on that day. It's close, but it's within their limit.
The aircraft wasn't too heavy to take off.
In that aircraft on that day, with that weight, how much runway would be needed to take off safely?
Using the actual weight of the aircraft and the CRJ-100 specifications, Investigators calculate how much runway the plane needed to lift off.
The weight of the aircraft affects how fast they have to be going to be able to lift off, and that is directly correlated to how much runway it takes to be able to achieve that speed.
3,744 feet.
3,744 feet, and runway 26 is
3,501 feet.
Investigators reach an astonishing conclusion.
runway 26 is 243 feet too short. They ran out of runway.
They now understand why the plane couldn't get airborne. But they're still mystified. Why didn't Flight 5191 take off from the longer runway?
Hate to say this, but you're not going to get any answers from the first officer either. His injuries are very severe.
The first officer is medically unfit to be interviewed. It's a big loss to the investigation.
It can be frustrating when you're not able to speak with people that you'd like to speak with, but as investigators, we need to work with the data that we have.
Investigators look for other clues that might reveal why Flight 5191 ended up on a runway they were not cleared to use.
All right, they left the gate here. They taxi along here. They're supposed to leave from runway 22 here. But they end up here. The question is, why?
So when we were looking into trying to understand why this flight crew thought they were on runway 22, we looked at anything that was different, anything that the flight crew may have misunderstood with regard to both the airport and the charts or any of their training.
Hey, look at this. Our guys got some shots of the runway. Hey, check this out. Taxiway to runway 22. It's blocked off by construction.
There were numerous construction projects that were in place at the Lexington airport the day of the accident.
Okay, sure, but wasn't that in their chart?
Normally, when a taxiway is closed, pilots receive an interim airport chart with an alternate route.
Nope, nothing on the chart.
Investigators are amazed to learn that the crew's airport chart only showed the taxi route before construction, not the updated taxi route.
It is a surprise to see at the airport construction had not been updated in the charts that the flight crew had.
It's a disturbing find. Could out-of-date taxi charts have misled the pilots into taking off from a runway that was too short for their plane?
So they get out there and they find their taxiways blocked, and they don't have anything to tell them how to get to runway 22.
That could trip you up.
But something doesn't add up. Comair Flight 5191 wasn't the only plane departing Lexington that morning.
Other planes left before them, and none of them ended up on runway 26.
Eagle Flight runway 22. Cleared for takeoff.
The other two flights that took off prior to 5191 have received the same information that the flight crew from 5191 received and did not have any difficulties in navigating to the runway.
The fact that two other aircraft were able to depart successfully that morning caused us to look deeper.
Maybe there's something on the security footage.
Investigators turn their attention to CCTV footage in the hopes that it will explain why Comair 5191 took off from the wrong runway.
to retrieve security footage from cameras on the parking garage that showed our aircraft taxiing out that morning.
All right, let's see what they were actually up to.
Investigators quickly confirm how straightforward the taxi route was.
Taxi's short and there's no other aircraft in sight.
Our assessment based on examination of surveillance video showed that it was a nominal taxi. The taxi route from the ramp to runway 22 was straightforward and only required one runway crossing 26.
Wait, stop it right there. It looks like they've stopped at the hold short line for runway 26.
Before takeoff, planes stop or hold short of the runway until they're cleared to proceed by air traffic control.
Well, they were on their way to runway 22. Why the heck would they stop there?
Investigators are startled by the discovery.
We noticed at that time that the aircraft had stopped prior to runway 26 for over 50 seconds. This is unusual because there was no real reason for them to stop there.
We need to see the taxi route.
All right.
Were there clues telling the pilots they were in the wrong place?
One of our main questions when we realized that they stopped for 50 seconds at the hold short line for runway 26 was what could they have been seeing?
To better understand why the pilots of Comair Flight 5191 stopped at the hold short line for the wrong runway.
All right, let's get started.
Investigators retrace their taxi route.
We wanted to understand what the flight crew was seeing. In order to do that, we had to do a taxi demonstration to identify all the signage, the markings, and the cues available to the flight crew.
Here on the left, there's a sign for runway 26. Straight ahead, I can see the hold short line for runway 26. I mean, it's as clear as day.
Things that we were looking for during that taxi demo were things like the quality of the markings on the taxiway, the signage, whether it was illuminated or not.
The taxi line splits three ways.
Investigators can see what the pilots would have seen from the hold short line for runway 26. The line on the left goes to runway 26. The line in the middle is the route to runway 22. The line on the right is runway 22's old taxi route, blocked by barricades.
I can clearly see the sign is telling us that we're at the hold short line for runway 26. I mean, it's hard to miss that.
Investigators discover that the crew had clear cues that they were at the hold short line for runway 26, not 22. The question remains, how did they miss those cues?
Okay, let's go to 26.
The test plane follows the line on the left to runway 26.
Okay, see? That's where they should have taken the taxi route and stopped the hold short line for runway 22.
Investigators are surprised to learn that even as Flight 5191 was turning onto runway 26, the crew had a clear view of the sign pointing to the runway they were meant to be on.
There were no features in the environment in terms of the signs, marking, or lighting that showed they were on runway 22.
All the cues are right there, in plain sight.
Joe Sedor then uncovers one more disturbing fact.
When we taxied from the taxiway onto and turned onto runway 26, all of the lights on runway 26 were out, and there was no lights in the distance. As an experienced pilot, I look at that and say, why did this flight crew take off from this runway?
We need to know what was going on in that cockpit.
That is weird with no lights. Yeah.
Abandoned, but not forgotten. Neglected, but still reminding of its history.
Looks like something from Mad Max meets Waterworld. What's it doing there?
Decaying ruins, deserted towns hiding their secrets, remnants of an ancient world, haunted by the ghosts of the past. Let's discover their secrets. Abandoned Engineering. Friday at 10 p.m. on National Geographic.
Svake jeseni i zime, virusi i bakterije pokreću zabavu koja može pokvariti vašu. Tantum Verde pomaže brzo i efikasno. Tantum Verde ublažava bolne upale grla i usne duplje.
Pre upotrebe detaljno proučiti uputstvo o indikacijama, merama opreza i neželjenim reakcijama na lek, posavjetovati se sa lekarom ili farmaceutom.
Kada otvoriš Pepsi Max, dobiješ maksimalan ukus 0 šećera, ali nemoj da misliš da ćeš dobiti savršeno telo sa 0 vežbanja. Milione lajkova sa 0 talenta, jer to nije realno. Ono što jeste realno je sjajan Pepsi Max ukus, maksimalan ukus sa 0 šećera. Zato prati svoj ukus i probaj Pepsi Max.
Za neke se stvari lako zagrejati. Kao za domaći ukus Podravka supe, koji u naše živote uvek donosi osjećaj topline. Baš zato smo zagrejani za supu već 65 godina. Podravka.
Jakobs 3 u 1. Savršena kombinacija kafe, mleka i šećera. Jakobs te vodi u bioskop. Kupi 12 Jakobs 3 u 1 ili 2 u 1 kesica kafe i zameni ih za kartu u Cineplex bioskopima. Jakobs.
Naši klasici. Nikad bolji.
Following D-Day, the Allies advance across the battlefield of Europe, both sides playing for survival. With expert insights and immersive reenactments, National Geographic takes an unflinching look at this desperate game of advance and retreat. One side has everything to win, the other everything to lose. The brand new season of Hitler's Last Stand on National Geographic.
Not recommended for persons under the age of 12.
The cockpit voice recorder from Comair Flight 5191 is finally ready to be reviewed.
Okay, let's hear what we've got.
It may be the only hope of explaining why the crew ended up on an out-of-service runway, instead of the one they were cleared to use.
In this type of human factors accident, it's very difficult because we have to try to determine what the pilots were thinking. The main tool that we use in order to determine that is the cockpit voice recorder. The CVR was very important in understanding what the flight crew was talking about and what they were doing during the taxi and the takeoff.
You up for flying this leg? I'll take us to Atlanta.
Okay, so the first officer is going to fly. That's standard stuff.
The flight crew were conducting themselves in a professional manner.
For home briefing, Comair standard, run the checklist, your leisure. Keep me out of trouble, I'll do the same for you.
I'll do the same. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, here comes the taxi brief.
Flight seat flex takeoff procedures off, You said what runway, 24?
That's 22.
22. The ILS is out on 22. Came in the other night, the runway identifier lights were out all over the place. All right. 22's your short taxi. Any questions?
No questions before starting at your leisure.
Something in the briefing surprises investigators.
Wait, stop it right there. Is that not a short brief to you?
they discover that the crew used an abbreviated version of the taxi brief called Comair Standard.
Pull up the Comair Standard taxi brief. There's no mention of crossing runways or stopping to call ATC if they're unsure where they are.
Investigators are baffled to discover that even the shortened taxi brief with 8 checklist items, including a very crucial one, wasn't followed.
Yeah, they never briefed on the runway they had to cross to get to runway 22.
The crew's abbreviated briefing that morning was a deviation from standard operating procedures that we identified.
Had the crew done a full taxi briefing, they would have discussed the need to cross runway 26 on the way to 22.
They missed an opportunity to review the airport diagram and determine that they needed to cross runway 26, an intervening runway, before they reached runway 22.
Okay, let's hear their taxi checklist.
Flight controls. Check left. On the right, trims.
Engage 07.2.
Radar terrain displays. All taxi checks complete.
Finish up the before takeoff checklist, your leisure.
One other thing on the CVR we heard was the captain using the term, at your leisure. It was used so many times on the CVR. What this told us is that this flight crew was relaxed. Maybe they were a little bit too relaxed.
Yeah, I know 3 guys at Kennedy. Actually, 2 guys. One went, but he did get through the sims.
Oh, really?
Then a first officer from Cincinnati. He got through the second part, and that's as far as he got.
Wait, stop it right there.
Investigators cannot believe what they're hearing.
What the heck is he talking about?
Instead of focusing on their checklists, the crew of 5191 were having a casual conversation during a critical moment. It's a major breach of what's called the sterile cockpit rule.
The sterile cockpit rule requires that pilots refrain from non-operational conversation during significant portions of flight. One of the key reasons for the sterile cockpit rule is that non-pertinent conversation can be distracting.
And that's as far as he got. And then he actually got offered the position.
Did he take it, or?
Yeah, he took it.
Oh, okay.
The captain should be shutting this conversation down, not encouraging it.
Although the first officer started the conversation, the captain is responsible for ensuring that sterile cockpit rule is enforced and distractions do not enter the cockpit that could affect the safety of flight.
After 40 seconds of casual conversation,
Second engine started, anti-ice probes, windshield low.
investigators hear the pilots turn to their takeoff checklist.
Now they finally get back to their jobs.
We're surprised by that. That non-pertinent conversation was in a critical area when the flight crew was making their taxi out to the runway, where the flight crew needs to be 100% flying the aircraft.
Could that period of inattention hold the key to this tragic accident?
Abandoned, but not forgotten. Neglected, but still reminding of its history.
Looks like something from Mad Max meets Waterworld. What's it doing there?
Decaying ruins, deserted towns hiding their secrets, remnants of an ancient world, haunted by the ghosts of the past. Let's discover their secrets. Abandoned Engineering. Friday at 10 p.m. on National Geographic.
Kada otvoriš Pepsi Max, dobiješ maksimalan ukus, 0 šećera, ali nemoj da misliš da ćeš dobiti savršeno telo sa 0 vežbanja. Milione lajkova sa 0 talenta. Jer to nije realno. Ono što jeste realno je sjajan Pepsi Max ukus. Maksimalan ukus sa 0 šećera. Zato prati svoj ukus i probaj Pepsi Max.
We dig deeper. Push the boundaries further. In a search for discoveries that could rewrite the history books.
It's kind of unusual.
With finds so big,
We should have to go deeper.
we can't show you yet.
Whoa, what an adventure.
A brand new season, Lost Treasures of Egypt, on National Geographic.
not recommended for persons under the age of 12.
Okay, let's see what we've got so far.
Investigators wonder if a casual conversation is at the heart of the crash of Comair Flight 5191.
We skipped out at a briefing that would have told them they needed to cross 26 to get to 22. Then for almost a minute, they violate the sterile cockpit rule. Let's see what happens when they get here.
Investigators hope the crew will give some indication why they stopped at the hold short line for runway 26.
Thrust reversers are armed. Autocross flow is manual. Ignition is off. Altimeters are 3000, across the board, cross-checked. I'll check in with the cabin.
That's it?
It was surprising to us that there was no conversation about their location on the airfield or confusion about it while they were holding short on runway 26.
We know they were distracted, but when they stop their chit-chat, they don't seem to recognize, know, or check where they are.
We got no information based on the conversation of the flight crew while they were holding short that they were disoriented. No indications at all.
Investigators are amazed by what they hear next.
At your leisure, Comair 121, ready to go.
Comair 191, Lexington Tower. Fly runway heading, clear for takeoff.
Hold there. So they're completely relaxed when they ask for clearance. In fact, so relaxed or distracted that the first officer uses the wrong flight number.
Investigators realize the grim truth.
These guys actually thought they were lined up for runway 22.
The fact that they stopped at runway 26 and subsequently called for takeoff indicates that they lost awareness that they had not crossed runway 26.
They turn onto runway 26. Then what? Keep going.
Lineup checks completed. All yours, Jim.
First officer takes the controls. So he's looking ahead, probably for the first time.
At this time, the captain taxied the aircraft out onto the runway and then transferred controls to the first officer. So before this time, the first officer was heads down in the cockpit.
My brakes, my controls.
When the first officer looked out, he saw a runway. He may not have perceived that it was a narrower runway than runway 22.
They're looking down runway 26. Why don't they see the sign for 22 off to the right?
Neither pilot cross-checked their location at the time that they took the runway.
Set thrust, please. Thrust set. That is weird with no lights. Yeah.
Hold on. Runway 26 is not in use, so it's not lit. They see the lights for 22 until they cross it. They're looking down a pitch dark runway, and it doesn't faze them.
Investigators wonder if the pilots were confused about what the runway should have looked like.
When they began the takeoff roll on runway 6, they had no centerline lights or edge lights on this runway. However, based on the first officer's previous experience the night before, he did not expect to see lights.
The ILS is out on 22. Came in the other night, the runway identifier lights were out all over the place.
And so it would not necessarily have been an unusual sight picture.
Such decision-making based on a person's mistaken assessment is called confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias is where the flight crew expects something to be there, even though it might not actually be there. He noticed there was no lights on the runway, but he just accepted the fact.
What happens next?
Under knots. Checks.
The pilots now see they're almost out of runway.
V1, rotate.
And don't have the required speed to get airborne.
Whoa. Damn it!
That's it. They finally realize something's wrong and it's too late.
Based on our calculations, the crew needed to recognize that they were on the wrong runway and successfully reject the takeoff about 20 seconds into the takeoff roll. However, their recognition did not occur until much later when the captain called rotate at a lower speed than what was required.
Investigators have unraveled the mystery of what happened inside the cockpit of Flight 5191.
They started by skipping the full briefing. And then after a long discussion about the airline, they lose sight of where they are. They stop at the wrong place, and they completely miss all the signage that they're at the wrong runway. By the time they figure out the mistake, it's too late. These guys are going through the motions when they should have been at full attention.
The crew's failure to use available cues and aids to identify and check the plane's location led to the tragedy of Comair Flight 5191. But the team still has one unanswered question.
Why didn't the controller tell them they were at the wrong runway?
Investigators wonder if the air traffic controller of Comair Flight 5191 could have picked up the crew's error and prevented the accident.
Happy to answer any questions.
With the air traffic controller, we were trying to understand, did the controller have an opportunity to see this airplane take the wrong runway and prevent the accident?
At 6:05, they asked for takeoff clearance. Runway 22 was free, so I gave Comair clearance for takeoff.
At your leisure, Comair 121, ready to go.
Comair 191, Lexington Tower. Fly runway heading, clear for takeoff.
Runway heading, clear for takeoff, 191.
And what did you do next?
I saw the plane proceed towards runway 26 and then scanned runway 22 to make sure there were no vehicles on it.
Did you watch the flight take off?
Not if I have other jobs to do.
Investigators make one final discovery.
And then I turned over here to count my flight strips.
And why would you start counting your flight strips then?
I wasn't busy. It only takes a few minutes. And there was no reason to think that they'd have any problems. In 17 years, I've never seen a plane that size try to take off from runway 26.
The controller was not watching the airplane and assumed that the airplane was going to take off on the correct runway because this is such a simple airport and because there was no other traffic on the airport at the time of the accident.
And if you hadn't turned away, would you have noticed that they were in the wrong place?
I might have.
FAA regulations do not require controllers to monitor every takeoff. But if the controller had been watching the runway instead of counting flight strips, he might have noticed Flight 5191's mistake.
He was not actually required, nor are any controllers required, to actually watch an aircraft during its takeoff roll. Had they been required to do that, this would have given an opportunity to have the takeoff aborted.
The NTSB concludes that several factors led the pilots to lose track of their position on their way to the runway.
Contributing to that was the flight crew's failure to maintain sterile cockpit and to have a non-pertinent conversation prior to takeoff.
This crash happened because of a period of distraction during what was perceived as a relatively simple taxi. And it illustrates the perils of distraction in that it can take you off task. It can cause you to lose awareness. And in this case, both crew members lost awareness of where they were on that airport surface and made a mistake that was extremely consequential.
Among the NTSB's recommendations is a basic technological change to prevent pilots from getting lost. The CRJ-100 at the time had sophisticated avionics, but it lacked a simple GPS system available in cars of the same era.
Install moving map GPS displays in CRJ-100 cockpits.
The NTSB also makes recommendations for flight crews.
Require pilots to check that they are at their assigned runway before crossing the hold short line.
First Officer James Polhinky, the lone survivor of Comair Flight 5191, suffered severe injuries, including the loss of his left leg. He never returned to commercial aviation.
This was a catastrophic accident. It affected scores and scores of lives. But the legacy of this accident are the safety changes that have been made to prevent this type of accident from happening in the future.
This accident shows that there are threats in any environment, no matter how docile they seem, and that flight crews have to be aware and have to be looking for all the threats at all the time.
Not recommended for persons under the age of 12.
It's the science of stupid. Warning, some of the actions you are about to see are foolish in the extreme. Try them at home and you'll wind up in hospital. Yes, this is the show that combines science and stupidity. Over the next half hour, you'll be witnessing the behavior of people who think they are above the laws of science. We'll explain what went wrong and why by exploring the scientific principles behind hydroplaning, momentum, Hooke's law, and pressure. Science takes no prisoners. Mess with it, and it'll mess you up. So don't try any of this at home, or anywhere else for that matter. Come on in to the science of stupid. On this show, we'll be looking at the relationship between friction and velocity, the trajectory of a projectile, and momentum. Cracking. But first, this. Feeling peckish? Fancy a quick snack? How about something a bit spicy? A chili, perhaps?
Okay, guys. Go. Here we go.
A bit too hot for you? Want to know why? Well, you've come to the right place. Science, please. Spicy food doesn't actually burn you. It just triggers a receptor in the mouth that responds to pain from physical heat. The ingredient that triggers this burning reaction is capsaicin. Oily and fatty substances like milk can help, because capsaicin can dissolve in oils, but it won't dissolve in water. So drinking that won't help. The Scoville scale is a measure of how much capsaicin a chili contains. Your average spicy curry is no more than 200 on the scale. But how do some of the world's hottest chilies measure up?
I'm not worried, because I have Mexican blood in me running through these veins. So that means I can take this.
His first mistake is thinking Mexican blood is different from other people's blood. His second mistake is trying to eat a habanero chili that's up to 300,000 on the Scoville scale. Oh dear. This isn't a meal for a first day, is it? The Trinidad scorpion chili. Well, don't snort it. Those burn receptors are in your nose too. And it registers almost 1.5 million on the Scoville scale.
So, it's saving.
Yeah, I could have told you that. In fact, I just did. And finally, the ghost chili.
It's really hot.
Also, over 1 million Scoville. It's about 100 times as potent as a jalapeno.
Ow! Ah!
Now, can you remember how we get rid of all that burning capsaicin? Is it cold, refreshing water? No. It may seem the obvious choice, but remember, capsaicin doesn't dissolve in water, so it's useless for flushing away the heat. Bread, better. Capsaicin does dissolve in fats and oils, so the vegetable oil in bread can help. And milk, perfect, because milk also contains fats which dissolve capsaicin, so it can soothe the burning. A bit.
Still hurt?
Yeah, it hurts.
Oh.
Yeah, you can tell.
Ah.
If that's put you off chilies, it's put me off chilies, maybe try something a little milder. How about cinnamon?
Cinnamon, dude. Hey, shout out to my girl.
Did I say milder? Just kidding. Like chili, cinnamon triggers pain receptors because it contains an irritating chemical called cinnamaldehyde. Yes, it does. Cinnamon is a caustic powder which, if it gets sucked into your lungs, can damage them. It doesn't dissolve, it just sits there. But if you don't believe me,
So I have a spoon, and I want a spoon bigger than this.
I'd go with the smaller spoon, madam, but it is up to you.
All right, so here's the cinnamon, all right?
Yeah, we're fine.
All right, here goes.
It's a volcano! Oh, I should have mentioned cinnamon is even more water resistant than chili, so that won't work.
Y'all got me.
See, I told you. In fact, it doesn't even dissolve in your saliva, which is why she could do this. Spectacular.
Over and out. Over and out.
Now, drop-ins. It's all about teetering on the edge of a giant ramp on a small wooden board, obviously. Here's a drop-in as demonstrated by a 7-year-old boy. You drop down onto a ramp to pick up enough speed for tricks. Here's a kid in a wheelchair doing it. And here's a middle-aged man. Okay, if life experience has taught you nothing at all, then at least pay attention to the science. It won't let you down. To maintain the pendulum motion of a drop-in, all the forces acting on the skater would need to be concentrated through his center of gravity and the board. To do this, the body is at 90 degrees to the board. If the skater leans backwards, the imbalance of forces will rotate him, lean forwards, and this happens. And any obstruction is also likely to result in a forwards rotation by stopping the board, but not the rider. Staring down a near-vertical ramp is a little daunting, so it's understandable if you want to lean back a bit. But please don't. And here's why. Remember, 90 degrees to the board. By leaning back, she's moved her center of gravity way out of line, pushing her off balance. Chin up, now you know how it works. He looks like he knows what he's doing. Oh, it's a good start, but at this point, he's too far forward. Remember, 90 degrees is where you want to be, as opposed to hospital.
Oh, broken collarbone!
It's always good to have a friend on hand with some sound medical advice.
Broken collarbone!
And support. Having perfected the technique, you need a good quality ramp like this. But if you don't have one, make sure your substitute allows you to keep that critical 90-degree angle, which this child's slide does not.
I was gonna say that's the last try, but I'm trying it again.
Well, double check it by all means, but yeah, I'd call it a day now. How about a brick handrail? No? A concrete wall then? Yeah, different ramps, same result. Any imperfections, like, say, a large bump, an acute angle, or the gap between some bricks, then whilst your board may come to a stop, you won't. No, and the excruciating pain in your shoulder is proof enough. A good ramp, that 90-degree angle, and it's as easy as falling off a log or a school bus. Now, what scientific principle is this fellow about to demonstrate? Have a guess. So, did you guess the scientific principle we're about to see? Is it the relationship between acceleration and mass? Nope, it's tensile strength and impact. Plummeting to the ground from height at great speed is generally a bad idea, but that hasn't stopped some people making it a pastime. Zip wires are a wonderful way to get some fresh air and to take in the view, although quite terrifying if you're afraid of heights. Yep, zip wires. Loads of fun and usually quite safe. But before you rush off to put one up in the garden, you need to know some basic rules of geometry. The trajectory of a zip wire journey is called a catenary, which is caused by the weight of the cable and the rider. The final stretch of the catenary is angled upwards to slow the rider and create a perfectly timed stop. All zip wires need a slight downward angle. Around 4 degrees is the optimum angle to get enough velocity. So, you don't want too much weight dangling from the wire, and you don't want too steep a descent. Otherwise, you'll be heading for trouble. Fast. I'm no mathematician, but that doesn't look like 4 degrees. Anyone got a protractor? Increase that 4-degree angle by just 1 degree, and you could be going up to 25% faster. Well, that's definitely not 4 degrees. Closer to 90. Oh yeah, and don't use rope. It's a bit stretchy. Once you've got the angle, test the height using a weight. Just make sure that weight isn't a child. This is what friends and family are for, to laugh at you when you're down. And don't forget, the heavier the rider, the greater the momentum, and the harder it is to stop. Although a tree will always do the job. Funny things, swings. I don't know what it is about being swung back and forth on a plastic seat, but people love them, especially the little ones. But providing you're not a big lad on a tiny swing, getting on usually isn't the problem. It's getting off. Cue the science. The motion of a swing is created by gravity pulling you downwards and the tension in the chains moving you in an arc like a pendulum. If you jump off during a swing, you need to find the correct balance between launch angle and velocity. The higher you are when you jump, the steeper your trajectory will be. Energy from the downward swing is converted into velocity, so the lower your jump, the faster you travel. There are around 150,000 swing accidents a year in the US. So don't be a statistic, nail your speed and try to let go at the right time. Starting simply, the forward dismount. Not that simple. All that velocity and a small lean forward becomes a major faceplant. You see? Now, if you think getting off forwards is tricky, it's nothing compared to backwards. Let go on the backward swing, and your trajectory will be dictated by gravity. Respect your elders, they say. I don't. At least not these elders. He got off too late. A steep trajectory meant he had no chance of clearing the table. Leaping off at the lowest point would have meant more velocity, but not enough height. Had he leapt at just below 45 degrees, he'd have achieved the perfect trajectory. But he didn't.
Just run it off. Just run it off.
Oh, and a medical footnote, running it off works if you've got a stitch, not if you actually require stitches. If you want to show off, you'll need loads of velocity. Nearly, but not quite. Check out these Russian swingers. They use solid metal poles instead of chains, and with good reason. The swing's arc depends on the tension in the chains. If the swing rises too high, the chains lose tension and the seat drops. With solid poles, that doesn't happen. Meaning these fellas can even nail a 360 and be reaching speeds of over 20 miles an hour. Just watch him go! Skiing not dangerous enough for you? Try snowboarding, because statistically you're at least 4 times as likely to damage your spine. And the surest way to really stuff yourself up is to try a jump. So, remember the following points. Snowboards work best on snow. Watch out for hidden obstructions and obvious ones. And look out for other people on the slopes. Well, that was a close one. That was even closer. Now, if you want to land on your board, and not your face, then you need to master the takeoff. It's all about speed and popping. When slaloming, a snowboarder angles the uphill edge of their board into the snow to avoid toppling over. But this increases friction on the one side and so decreases speed. For maximum speed going into a jump, you can reduce friction by spreading your body weight evenly and keeping the board pointed directly forward. Next is a technique called popping. As you hit the lip of the ramp, push down with your legs and jump up with both feet at the same time. This generates more height by using your muscles like a spring. So first things first, get your speed up. Because not everything you land on is as forgiving as snow. Zigzagging creates friction, which slows you down, as does hitting a wall. You've got the speed, now for a pop, but you have to really go for it. Well, something's popped. I suspect it's his shoulder. Finally, if you want to try a few tricks, Lean forward to let your angular momentum give you some spin. But you can overdo it. And underdo it. He seems remarkably calm.
I don't know. I mean, I got health insurance.
Ah, fine. We'll be off then. Love a stunning view? Not afraid of hurtling to a messy death? Well, rock climbing's the sport for you. But to be safe, first get the right equipment and training. Oh, and follow the rules. 1. Choose a suitable climbing surface. 2. Bring appropriate safety gear. And try to land on it. 3. Get a grip. It's all about gravity and friction. Gravity is trying to pull you down. Friction is what you need to prevent it. And here's how. To create sufficient friction, you need to apply as much force as possible to the climbing surface. The harder you press, the more friction you get. On most climbing surfaces, you can use your feet and hands to hook on to any features in order to apply enough force to counteract gravity. But on a rock face with fewer features, you need to keep as close to the surface as possible, taking strain off the hands and pushing down on the feet, increasing friction. Or you might fall. But if all your climbs were full of handy holes, life would be just too easy. So what if your surface has almost no holes at all? It's every sane climber's nightmare, a near featureless surface. So staying close to the rock face is key to creating maximum friction.
Oh my God.
You said it. To create enough friction on a vertical crack, you need to apply horizontal force by pulling on the crack with your arms and pushing on it with your legs. Even when you're really good at this, things can suddenly go very wrong. Remember, maximum force equals maximum friction. So you need to push as hard as possible with your feet. Once his legs stop pushing horizontally, he loses vital friction and falls at up to 30 miles an hour. If two featureless walls are facing each other, you can climb up by chimneying.
So how are you going to get down?
Good question.
Damien!
Hitting the deck with over 1,000 pounds of force, the fact Damien survived is more miracle than science. So don't even think of trying this. The harder you push, the more friction you get. But your body weight is working entirely against you here. And what happens when you get to the top? The splits approach, but by swinging one of his legs away from the wall, he loses too much force from the other. Remember, low force equals low friction.
Damien!
Better to crack the science than your heels, unlike Damien, who fractured both of his. There you go. Proof, if proof were needed, that the world's a dangerous place, full of speed-obsessed adolescents, pyromaniacs, and worst of all, cinnamon. So, be safe. Don't try any of this stuff yourself. Just watch other people doing it on The Science of Stupid.
Not recommended for persons under the age of 12.
Dubai International Airport. One of the busiest global hubs on the planet and aiming to stay there.
clear for takeoff.
But perfection is never easy.
Oh, thank you very much for this morning gift.
It takes a crack team to handle the daily pressure.
If you don't love it, it's just gonna kill you.
Non-stop, 24/7, 365.
Medical emergency.
Handling the unexpected, the extraordinary, and the drum.
The flight has departed. We have births, we have deaths, the whole spiel.
It's the job of